So welcome everybody to our Forest Steward training with Green Seattle Partnership. This year's theme is propagation. So we're going to be talking a lot about different propagation techniques. My name is Jacob. I use they, them pronouns and he pronouns. I'm an interim plant ecologist with Green Seattle Partnership. And something that's been inspiring joy in nature is seeing both like the foam flower and the piggyback plant along trail sides. Really love that they kind of like paved the way for us. And then I have a co-host here. I'll let him introduce himself too.
Hi, everybody. Eric Sterner, he, him pronouns, planecologist. So glad that you all can join us this evening. And yeah, look forward to jumping into this.
All right, cool. So here's our agenda for the evening. We're beginning the session now. We're doing some introductions. Folks are introducing themselves in the chat. We'll do like a little bit of framing to kind of talk about how we chose this as our theme for this year. And then around 6:15, we'll go over some current practices, including like our nursery strategies, barrier strategies, live stakes, some examples with direct seeding. We're going to talk a little bit about mulching and its application to propagation and just general stewardship care, as well as how these like techniques can be applied to your stewardship zone, along with some like experimental play folks have done. We'll have some breakout groups. As Eric had mentioned before, like, we want folks, we know some things, and our guest Leah, who will introduce down the road, will know some things, but we also want to hear from you and like hear what you've done, what you know works, what you have tried and doesn't work. An opportunity for folks just to talk to each other and really see like what the kind of community vibe is around propagation, what we've done. Then we'll hear from our keynote speaker, Leah Diga with Oxbow Nursery, going over propagation. And then at the end, we'll have a little time for question and answer. I'll pass it over to you, Eric.
Yep, yep. All right. So propagation basics. So we're going to jump into genetics. We're going to talk about basic of ethical harvest and respectful exchange, understanding the time of year and knowing plants. We talk about this often, but it's great to use mulch but also you can take in consideration of compaction and managing how we are uh, spending time out there in our sites doing land care and restoration projects. And then most importantly for me, well, not most importantly, but I really am excited for this breakout conversation prompt. Really want folks, forest stewards, partners that are here, folks that are joining us this evening to share what has worked in the past. And we'll have our prompt slide, but just to kind of set the stage that we have a lot of folks that maybe are here to learn, here to share. I'm really excited. So next slide. All right. This is the land acknowledgement. We humbly recognize that we are gathered on the indigenous land of the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of coastless peoples, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot. We thank these caretakers of this land who lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge that the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights and to sovereignty and to self-determination. We commit to being better listeners and learners and to lifting Indigenous voices while centering restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. We also commit to identifying and stopping racism and all forms of oppression.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so as we get started, I just want to take a second to share this picture and just to sit with it for a moment. This is a place a lot of us call home now, sort of a bird's eye view of the city of Seattle. And yeah, we're really lucky to be able to live here in this really beautiful place surrounded by water. You might be able to recognize some of the features that are here. It's looking south, looking kind of south east. You can see a number of natural and built features that sort of kind of build out the environment that is the city of Seattle and sort of the infrastructure and the bones for Green Seattle Partnership and the urban forest restoration, natural area restoration that we all take part in. For me, and part of my practice with teaching environmental ed and for teaching all things natural resource management, it's important for me and for us to kind of also name and go deeper about like where we are. And Seattle is sort of the Anglicization of the name of Saal, who was a Duwamish and Suquamish leader. And for him, the city of Seattle is named by its founders. And so you can see a few different depictions of Saal here. You can learn more about him through the Duwamish Longhouse, Suquamish tribe. It's important to, I think, put a face to the name of a word that we say all the time. And what I've been told is the most common Lashit seed that's been internationally named around the world now. So just want to go ahead and name that. Yeah. So framing, we at Green Seattle Partnership has kind of been in existence for about 20 years now. We're in our 20th year of programming, and there's kind of we're seeing an emerging need to look at what we do for propagation strategies, but also advance our propagation strategies beyond sort of our more traditional methods. And so, I know different folks in this room probably have done lots of play and a lot of different attempts of things, but this is sort of one of many attempts to kind of start to catalyze and think deeper about how we propagate native plants and desirable plants. As many of y'all have seen before, this is one of our probably our most one of our most common practices is ordering plants through the Green Seattle Partnership plant request form. These were due just a little while back, and there's not a totally not full list here on the right of all the different plants that we have and then we offer for folks. Um, so this is like our most common practice of how we sort of acquire plants, and we'll go more into kind of the bits of that. But yeah, a lot of this material is nursery material. We are sort of dependent on nurseries in general to both propagate plants and grow plants that which we buy with city money with public funds and provide to y'all. I think it's also important to note here too that like a lot of this nursery material is really dependent on agricultural farm workers, and just to sort of recognize all their amazing work that allows us to have access to a plethora of native plants. This is a snippet of our plant nursery here at Jefferson Horticulture. We have a pretty fair amount of our species that we provide that are grown and taken care of by our team here at Jefferson Horticulture. And so this is a snippet of two of our gardeners who are heavily involved in making sure that we get like really high quality plants and that they become available to us and they're in great shape to kind of go to their forever homes in the urban forest and natural areas. And yeah, this is like having been part of this, both Eric and I think have been a big part of this. It's such a production to do this year to year, and it's something that has a lot of great benefit. But essentially, ordering anywhere from 40 to 70,000 plants a year that comes from 5 to 10 nurseries from all around the county, around the state, delivered to a number of areas in trucks, a lot of loading and offloading, organizing, reorganizing, repackaging. And fortunately, we have our natural area crew who does an amazing job getting us all of our native plant orders sort of by Green Seattle Day, by Seattle Forest Week. But I just really want to highlight the NAC natural area crew and all of our nurseries that provide us with native plant material because it is really um, a huge effort every year. And they are sort of an essential piece of our community ecological restoration and bringing more plant variety, more habitat to all of our natural areas. Just another photo. I'm going to continue to show photos of, yeah, like this production. This is a photo of folks unloading different plant species. Like I said, sometimes all of our species will come from one nursery, but at other times we might get a number of different like, we might be getting Douglas fir from two different nurseries. And so as they come, we have another facility over in West Seattle where we stage a majority of these plant species as we reorganize them and package them. And we also water them, make sure that they are not getting like smothered by the big leaf maple drop. Really having full-time staff able to take care of them and be available for us. And the end goal is to get them to their forever homes, to get them to y'all, to get them to communities so they can be installed, cared, maintenance, and provide habitat and all the ecological benefits that they do over time. And in looking at our current nursery practice, I think it's important too to like note that like this is because of just the volume of plants that are provided, both like at Green Seattle Partnership and as an industry in general. There's just a lot of material that gets used. We have a lot of sort of these plastic molded injected pots that we recycle every year, but they also need to be material put in them. Whether it comes from a bare root and then is plugged into a pot and then brought to y'all, and then you plant them, we get the pots back, we store them somewhere, we recycle them as best we can. A lot of material that is used and needs to be like responsibly taken care of year to year. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and pass to Eric for these
Thanks,
slides.
Jacob.
Yeah.
Some of you are familiar with this, and maybe some of you aren't. But each year, um, the King Conservation District is super uh, fantastic with partnering with me and us, all of us, in the sense of providing coupon codes. So that process comes out later, like I try to jump on it to get in line because as a lot of you know, the sale runs quick. And look for communications about the bare root plant orders. And we're super appreciative of the long-standing relationship that I've been able to continue to coordinate with them on providing those coupons. And also these are one of the many different plant materials that we offer. Some do pot them up. You can go to the next slide, Jacob. So here folks picking up their plants. They come in various forms. You can see a sword fern on the table there and a very small plug. Some, obviously, again, referring back to Jacob, is that these are all grown in a field. So there's a lot of energy input coming before you get these plants either in a containerized plant or as a bare root plant that we hope can have success. But I think it's important to think about there's a trailer back there, it's refrigerated. Those plants are in the refrigeration. And there's a timing window for when they can get those out of the fields and eventually into our hands. Next slide, please. This is from the Forest to a Field Guide. It's really important to properly, it's like a completely opposite of a container planting. And so I think we just wanted to prompt this reminder, but I hear from a lot of folks that folks choose to pot up the bare root plants. So then they can baby them and grow them out. And this is another propagation method that is real successful. So next slide, Jacob. So here's a picture. This is right here at my office. I'm here on Beacon Hill with Jacob at the Jefferson Horticulture Facility or Urban or Citywide Hort. But this is, you can see the driving range for the golf course on the left-hand side. I took that photo from when I got here with the Green Seattle Partnership. It's a civilly spec'd. There's a water reservoir above this. This is Jefferson Park. Anybody can come here. In that picture, we took that picture just I think this year, end of last year. So there's a lot of success that's been going on for 20 years, and there's a lot of live stake material in that picture. There's a lot of overstock material, and all of you are familiar with this, but this training series is really kind of uh, how do we utilize this 20-year of input of community input of amazing amount of input and seed collecting and just thinking creatively and thinking about the next 20 years, right? So I pass it to you, Jacob.
Yeah, and Eric, this is a before and after about 10 years. Is that right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
about 10 years. I mean, some of
Yeah.
those plantings were already planted when I got here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing time when I think it's 12 or 13 years ago.
But I really just like this photo because it really shows sort of the impact of like what the combination of like nursery material, bare root material, live stake material, which we'll talk about in a second, and community volunteer hours, volunteers, like the combination of those two things really has transformed this hillside that was just sort of a monoculture of grass and unused into this habitat supporting, aesthetically pleasing, pollinator supporting mini greenbelt right here. And yeah, it's growing, and I think it's actually too like one of my favorite parts of Jefferson because it's so different from the sort of the top front end of the park. Getting on to our one of our other current practices, we've talked about nursery material that comes in potted. We've talked about the bare roots that come through King Conservation District, and now we're going to get a little bit into live staking. I think for folks like this is sort of, and for me, this is one of my favorite propagation strategies because it's so easy. It's pretty. I wouldn't say it's impossible to mess up, but I think it's pretty easy to do on a very one-on-one level. And willow staking has applications that like you kind of have a piece of material that can be as little as is viable to grow from a live stake, or you can really have bigger material that can successfully be already a 3 foot, 2 foot, 5 foot live stake going in. So this is sort of, I think, probably one of the most, and I don't want to assume, but like I think this is one of the easiest and probably more well-known strategies for propagation that is practiced within the Green Seattle Partnership right now. Again, this is another couple. These are another couple snippets from both the crew specifications and the Forest Steward Field Guide, which we'll send links to. I know some folks have hard copies, but essentially, there's a specific time, generally once live stake materials, which are often plants that live next to wet areas, streams, rivers, lakes, ponds that are generally have their roots around wet soil during different parts of the year. Essentially, you can cut off a section of that once the leaf drop has happened in the dormant season, which is late fall through the winter, and you can install that. A majority of the plants should be going under the ground. Oftentimes, soaking them in water can be really helpful to give them a little bit of juice before going into the ground, so they have water kind of absorbed into the live stake. And there's a lot of material here, but essentially, it's as simple as cutting the specific branch selected correctly to install into the ground. When it comes to like pieces about ethical harvest, generally, you want to look at a plant that is more mature when you're choosing to cut a live stake off of it. This is an example of a red osier, red twig dogwood. As you can see, it's very, very full in this area. And when that plant leaves out, there's going to be a lot of competition for sunlight. And so, you know, choosing and selecting a stake or a number of these stakes in here, usually you don't want to take more than 25 or 33% of a plant. Is generally a good number to be aware of when harvesting. But I think you could confidently take, 25% of these and cut them out of this mother plant and be confident that the host plant is going to do fine and is actually with that pruning can actually propagate more rigorous growth through the years. Um, Here's a couple photos from one of our partner events. That was some live stake training we did earlier into the late spring, or excuse me, in the early spring, late winter. But here we were at Beersheba Wetland, next to the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetland, and here's a picture of me sort of harvesting a stake material from a thicket like you had seen before, and I'm kind of cutting off some of the excess branches, and you want to be cutting kind of in some of these previous slides, kind of um, right above a node where there's a new bud. So that'll be kind of it's the top growth you can expect to grow out. Um, Cutting it to length, generally it could be anywhere. You want to have sort of greater than like a pinky's width, but thicker is generally better. And you want to kind of remove any leaves. You can remove buds from the lower end that's going to go in the ground. You don't have to, but there's a myriad of ways that are kind of highlighted in greater detail in those two resources I had shared. There's also some There's also a video on live stake training that we share too, and we just essentially find a spot that is soft enough to get the live stake deeply into the ground, where it's going to have enough sunlight, access to water, like one of our partner staff folks are doing here on the right. And what this has the ability to do is it really has the ability to transform an area like this, which is essentially dormant reed canary grass, and allow them to eventually kind of grow in and shade out and outcompete this reed canary grass over time, to where you get sort of more shade that allows the water to get cooler over time, which has benefits to the water quality, salmon habitat, aquatic invertebrate habitat for birds, among many other things. And if I remember right, I'm pretty sure Ed from Seward Audubon was talking about how red osier dogwood is a very great species for a lot of different songbirds. And Eric, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you here.
Yeah, so we have done some direct seeding periodically since my time here. I know that many of you may have that are forest stewards for several years that got a bag of seed, and we tried really hard to kind of provide some context for some seeding. We're wanting to circle back to try to experiment with collecting, finding what works, and that's really again an objective here to live staking. I think I agree with Jacob that live staking, a lot of people have success fairly quickly. And we will provide you with links. I put it in the chat. We're going to be providing you with recording of this presentation. We're going to provide you with lots of different links. And, I'm available, and Jacob's available to help answer questions. We really are interested in helping to build knowledge and share experiences, and especially in these breakout sessions that will be happening here shortly. So we can go to the next slide. So we've had some really successful situations. This is a power line project that um, you can see the power line on the left. This was like right when this project was starting. And several years after, it's the same power line. You can see the power poles in the middle of that picture. This particular forest steward had a lot of success with the seed that we provided. Um, and not everyone did, and that's okay, right? Like I can grow carrots really easily, and my friend who's a really great gardener grows all kinds of food. Like they're like, I can't get carrots to grow. And I was like, some people just have more luck with different seeds, and some seed you get maybe it's not as good as others. There's all these different nuances, but it is important to share some successes, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that more. And there is, another a follow-up training to this that we'll be sharing more information about coming and joining us in the field. Next slide. These are pictures from that particular project, Solidago and Smiaro. Um, those are great places to collect seed. They had some success with seeding. It is possible. Next slide. Some of the Berkman folks I think are on this call today. This is a really neat native pollinator project that Earth Corps got some grant funding, and Seattle Parks Green Seattle Partnership partnered with them and provided a lot of resources. You can see Earth Corps crew members, photos by Nelson, longtime Earth Corps staff member. And now this is a really active forest steward site. I took the photo of the loop in there, and I mean the forest stewards have really taken this and just really have nurtured this, and they're doing seeding. And I'm excited for them to be on today to kind of share some information and some experiences. Um, and here's another project, the next slide. So this is, again, this is all photos from Dean Drugi, and Dean reached out to me. This is this is out at Magnuson Park in the North Shore area. Sale Sandpoint's down below on the right. This was all turf area during the pandemic. They quit mowing this, and then Dean had reached out and said, "Hey, I want to try to do a meadow in this place," and we got the buy-in from the district. They're on the call this evening and in the breakout sessions. I'm sure if anybody has questions about this, or can follow up with me. But we provided resources. We did we did a smothering. You can see the big black. It's actually a billboard sign. So we smothered with really thick plastic. They did some scraping, and I'm sure many of you are not surprised. Scraping is not effective. Scraping just to disturb the seed bank. The smothering, as I've heard back from that team really provided some success. In the next picture, I think we have that's probably last year, the first phase, and they had some success. They learned something, but that's the scraping, believe. Maybe I might be wrong actually. But next slide. I mean, this is just a recent slide from Dean. So this, I mean, it's like, holy cow. And they really had some, they were, using meadowscapes, kind of best management practices. They learned about like using sand and, not everyone's going to be growing a meadow, but I just really think it's important to highlight um, three successful, really all volunteer. I mean, you all are out there stewarding these sites, so it's doable. And I pass it back to you, I think, Jacob.
Great, thank you, Eric. The last little part we're going to talk about before we hand it over to Leah is just mulching considerations. In sort of the past couple photos you see here on the right, you can see where this sort of designated walkway was for casting seed, for basically just for the human activity of walking, because um, as y'all probably know, like the less we can step on soil, the less we can compact the soil. It allows for sort of the soil microbes in the soil community to propagate and support all the different soil functions that are happening to better support soil biota, but then also the plants we see above and the pollinators and everything that is basically connected through, the soil ecosystem to the ecosystem above the ground and then throughout the area around it here too. And so, yeah, we're just gonna talk a little bit about mulching. Oops. Yeah, and as I mentioned, like ground compaction is something that here in the city of Seattle and in urban environments, like it's a little bit unavoidable to a certain degree, because so many of the places that are adjacent to our parks are, especially adjacent, are just they see a lot of human activity, and whether it's in an application like meadow restoration and meadowscapes, like Eric mentioned, or in an area like this where we have, when you have larger volunteer parties, you really don't want, you want to have sort of minimal disturbance in general. And so in this picture here on, the top right, you can see kind of the difference of a less compact soil in the cartoon on the left, allowing for a plant to have better ease of access for the root penetration, better water filtration or water penetration through the soil, as well as like space for air and other different complex biogeochemical functions. I'm sure y'all have had situations where where there has been a lot more foot traffic or human activity, or if someone has stepped in or around like the root zone of a plant, and those will have, may not see them immediately, but they will have adverse effects on those plants. Something to consider too is, I think that as we're learning a little bit more about too, which is kind of shows that like ecological practices are not always permanent or set in stone, is that as we were learning through different workshops through Xerxes societies and other pollinator advocates, like you don't necessarily want, I don't think we always want to have a total blanket mulch situation in a certain area. As we're learning, as I'm learning, there are places where, if there's too much mulch, it might actually create a barrier for pollinators to find their homes, or to dig a home into some looser soil. And so here's some excerpts here from Xerxes societies. Yes, we mean open patches of soil and sand with few or no plants. Why is it such an important feature to include when building a biodiverse yard or natural area? Because that's where most of our bees live. Around 70% of all native bee species in North America nest in the ground, preferring loose, undisturbed soil and bare patches of ground without a lot of dense vegetations, such as thick mulch. And so there's not an exact formula about like how much or how little or how you exact do it. I think um, there are places to consider mulching, like where we walk or as we sort of insulate our plants from hotter weather. But then there are places where, with looser soil that is not walked on or compacted, wanting to have spaces available for um, all the life we don't see all the time. With that being said, okay, so those are kind of our past current practices. We want to take the first 30 minutes to kind of just really frame what we currently do. And right now, we want to very soon break out into our small breakout groups. And here are some of the prompts, but we really want you all to talk to each other. We want to hear from you about propagation strategies you've tried, what has worked really well that you found, what has not worked at all. Are there methods that you've tried or seen that we haven't named that you're a big fan of? One of those I hadn't necessarily mentioned is like transplanting different plants from different areas. Like maybe there's a section of really thick, um, like let's say snowberry, for example, that you want to clear and make some room for it, or like, and you can maybe cut or dig a piece of that out and transplant it. I don't know, but I know there's a lot of folks in this room, and we want to collaboratively hear what everyone's trying and what everyone's doing. So with that, I think Maya's going to
Yeah.
send some breakout groups. Eric, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think so. Just to yeah, so we're gonna break out. It's in the chat there. There's the mural board, and if folks are having challenges with the mural board, it's okay. You can come back and you could share stuff in the chat. So yeah, we're and Jacob and I are gonna bounce around to the room. So look forward to seeing you in the rooms, and then after that, we'll come back around 6:50, I think is sort of what we're looking for to come back to hear Leah's portion of the presentation.
I'm sure we all just got cut short a little bit in speaking about our little bits here. Well, I'm really excited to hear back from folks about different things they've tried, different successes, and areas of growth, or things that hadn't worked out. To hear from all the different folks eventually. Um, so thanks for participating in that breakout room. It went by quick. Without too much further ado, and if you all have like stories that you heard or that you liked, or you want to share your own in the chat, go ahead and yeah, let us know what's worked and what hasn't worked. And without too much further ado, I'm going to pass to Eric to introduce our guest speaker for the evening.
Yeah. Leah, are you with us and you have the presentation open?
Yeah, let me.
Next slide. Yeah.
There you go.
So, welcome, Leah Daiga. I'm sorry, I'm still learning their name. So, Leah, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you're with Oxbow Farm and Conservation Center, Native Plant Nursery manager.
Mhm.
And so happy that you could join us for this presentation. We just connected, so it's been fun to connect with Leah and connect Leah with the greenhouse folks here. What I'm really understanding more and more about uh, propagation and native plant nurseries is that it's folks love to connect and share information. Um, you're from West Michigan. You have a BS in
Mhm.
environmental plant biology from Michigan State University, an environmental educator, ecologist, and community organizer. And again, thank you so much, Leah, for joining us this evening. And I'm gonna jump off and mute myself and camera. So all you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. As Eric said, my name is Leah Daiga. I have been with Oxbow Farm and Conservation Center for about a year and a half now. I moved to Seattle in 2022 and I've been in the native plant horticulture industry for about 4 years. Um, yeah, I just want to give like a brief context about what Oxbow is. If you've been out there, like shout out in the chat. Oxbow is a nonprofit that does many different things, and the native plant nursery is just one aspect of it. Our native plant nursery, as far as like native plants go, is pretty large. We grow about 70,000 plants a year and grow primarily from seed. Like I can only think of one species that we're doing divisions of, but otherwise we propagate exclusively from seed. And we grow about 160 different species. So that is the context with which and the experience with which I'm bringing to this conversation tonight. I'm going to cover a few different topics. I first want to kind of just ground us in the reality of native plant production in nurseries, briefly touch on like what does that look like? What are the philosophies? Some of the challenges. So we have a better idea of like what does containerized nursery stock, like what does it take to get there? Then, as Eric and Jacob teed up for us, we're going to talk more about seeds. There's an interest in propagating from seed from direct sowing, so we'll talk about seed collection and pre-treatment that's necessary for native seeds. We'll talk a little bit about site prep and some methods for direct sowing. And then I've selected a handful, I believe 5 different species that we can zoom in on how to collect, how to prepare, and how to sow that I think will equip you for like the broader um, seed collection and sowing adventure. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat at any time. I won't be monitoring the chat until the end, but it doesn't hurt to just throw them in there and then we can revisit them later. So with that, I'll get into it. Native plant production in nurseries. So native plant production, the native plant industry varies from other ways of growing plants. So it's not agriculture. We don't grow food, so we're not thinking like food growers. We also don't grow ornamentals, so we're not thinking like ornamental nurseries. Native plant nurseries utilize a different philosophy, which we call ecological horticulture. So ecological horticulture really emphasizes in working in relationship with natural processes as opposed to trying to combat them, both during the growing and outplanting phase. So I'm thinking about the seed and its success, the like from seed to going installing in your site. I'm thinking about the success of that plant and how it can be a useful ecological community member. And I'm ascribing growing techniques to help meet that goal. So for example, agriculture might be like, how do I grow the biggest tomato? And I'm like, how can I make the best community member? So we have different ways of growing things. For native plant nurseries, our management strategies center around encouraging species interactions, preparing plants for independence, and reducing negative environmental impacts. So I pull up this image here of a hoverfly. I'm a big fan of hoverflies because they're really cute, but because they're pollinators as adults, so in this stage, but then also their larvae, they're maggots, they're flies, eat aphids. So they are helpful and I like having them in the nursery because they're going to help me control the aphid population, right? So I'm encouraging species interaction. I'm preparing the plant for independence. So this often means watering regime. I don't want to be spoiling the plant or like babying the plant because I want it to go into your restoration site and not need to be watered every day because it's been hardened off, it's been grown, and it knows that it's not going to get water every day and it has prepared its roots for that. And then, of course, reducing negative environmental impacts. I think kind of what's the point of growing plants for restoration if you're like destroying the environment while doing so. So a lot of that has to do with integrative pest management, reducing the use of chemical insecticides. Plastic is a big thing that the nursery industry still needs to tackle of how much plastic we use, and other things like that. So in short, native plant nurseries are utilizing ecological horticulture, which is growing plants or like plants grown with nature for nature. So maybe a little cheesy, but that's a way to remember it. The reality, so that's the philosophy, that's the theory. The reality in the practice isn't quite so rosy. Propagation of native plants in the native plant nursery industry is a little underdeveloped, especially in Washington. I would definitely say the West Coast is more developed than the Midwest, where I'm from. But Washington, as compared to California or British Columbia, our native plant nursery industry is a little bit underdeveloped. There's a lack of resources around native plant propagation techniques. That's a big thing of just like there's not the information out there for how to grow Washington native species. A lot of it is personal experience and a lot of it is trial and error. So the information exists, it's just held at specific nurseries are holding the information. And so, as Eric said, that's why we like to collaborate so much, because there's not necessarily like an authority on how to grow these species. It's just everybody's individual experience. There are a couple resources like Ringer, RNGR, the Native Plant Network. They have some protocols out there for growing native plants. But again, it can be a little hit or miss. It's kind of like native plant nurseries post their protocol, and what works in one nursery might not work in the other. So all to say, there's not great information that's out there. But the information that is out there, the known techniques, they're not necessarily effective. Our native plants out here, partly because we have differing seasons. So like we have cold winter and we have a hot summer, we have a rain season, mean that our seeds have dormancy. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about pre-treatment. But that often means that the techniques for growing these plants they're long and they're complex. And after these long and complex seed treatments, the germination rates are low and uneven generally. Again, thinking about like tomatoes, like agriculture, if you buy a pack of tomato seeds from like Ace Hardware and 5% of them germinate, you're going to go back and be like, I want a refund. What's wrong with my tomato seeds? But if I grow like snowberry seeds, for example, and 5% of them germinate, I'm like, wow, this is a great year for snowberry. Like, that's a good germination rate. So it really differs. It really differs. And then I also want to call out that native plant seeds just haven't been selectively bred for effective production, unlike those tomato seeds, which have been, either genetically modified or just selectively bred over time to behave well in nursery settings or to germinate well. Native plants have not, nor do I think they should be. But the reality is they just don't like behave well. They are wild plants and they behave wildly. Uh, Speaking of like how difficult it is to grow from seed, I want to point out this just a little snippet from this study I did at the University of Washington in 2023, where we surveyed local native plant nurseries to see like what are their challenges, what's the status. And one interesting finding we found was that primarily native plant production is from vegetation. So this is like cuttings or division. 11 out of the 21 respondents said that they're primarily relying on vegetative reproduction. My inference is that this is because it's so difficult for them to grow from seed, as well as as Jacob talked about, there's a lot of advantages of cuttings. They take faster, like a seed. I'll continue to pick on snowberry. A snowberry seed is going to take so much time to germinate, and then it has to grow for like 2 or 3 years before it's a foot tall. Whereas a snowberry cutting, you can take a cutting that's a foot tall, stick it in the ground. A year later, you have a plant. So to meet that almost like unquenchable demand for native plants in the area, which don't get me wrong, is a great problem to have. A lot of nurseries are relying on vegetative reproduction, which we know is not ideal for restoration because we're losing some of that genetic diversity. So, just another thing to take into account is that the realities of native plant production, especially native plant production from seed, is a lot of time and energy. um, this is just a poll. I am working on a contract right now. And I'm talking about lead time with my client of like, okay, if you want me to grow from seed, this is how long I need before I'm able to get you a plant in our smallest size. So our smallest size is a 7 cubic inch plug, which 7 cubic inches is like this big, not very big. And these are the species they were interested in. And this is what I was able to quote them. So some of these aren't too bad, like a Saskatoon berry, service berry, like 12 months. I can whip it out in a year. Goat's beard, 8 to 12 months. But some of these species, especially bulbs, I'm looking at, what is this, 3 or 4 years to grow that from seed, over 4 years for dodecatheons or primula, the Henderson shooting star, foothill shooting star, or like a fawn lily. Those are going to take 4+ years to grow from seed. So just when you're thinking about native plant production, we can often be frustrated with the mismatch between what you want and what's available because, like, yeah, everyone wants fawn lily. Yes, but they take 4 years to grow. So I need to know that you want fawn lily this fall, like 4 years ago. So just be aware some of that mismatch is coming from just how long it takes to grow these species. All right, so that's my little soapbox about the native plant nursery industry. I could go on and on, but y'all are probably more interested in how to actually grow the plants. So let's talk about seed collection and pre-treatment. Seed collection, and okay, one last thing about native plant nurseries. Native plant nurseries, especially in Washington, are very vertically integrated, meaning the native plant nursery is doing everything from seed collection, like seed collection to giving you like selling the plant. We do everything except outplanting, and some nurseries like even do the outplanting. So a lot of nurseries are doing this themselves as well. So to successfully collect seeds, you have to be able to identify the species of interest and when it's seeding. So it's easier to identify it when it's flowering. So I might go early, say like, yep, this is the species I want, flag it. Otherwise, you have to be able to identify the seed head, which can be a little bit challenging. You have to know when the seed is ready to harvest. So that's something I've been practicing this year is creating a seed harvesting map so I can get ahead of seed harvesting and not just have to go look every week. And you have to know where and have access to a population. So hopefully at your restoration sites, you might have some stock plant that you can harvest from. But sometimes I run into species I would like to grow, but I don't know where a population is that I could collect seed from, or I don't have the right permit to collect from that location. So if you have some friends or some buddies that have a population on land that they own, that's like the easiest thing, just ask permission. Otherwise, with government land, there's like some permitting usually you have to go through. So those are a couple of challenges to be aware of and plan ahead for. As far as like physically collecting the seeds are ripe when they readily fall off the plant. So again, I'm going to do my tomato analogy. When you go to collect a ripe red tomato, you just want to like pull it and it just comes off the vine. If you have to yank that tomato off the vine, it's not ready. Seeds, other fruits and seeds are the same way, like 85-90% of the time. The seed should kind of just like fall off. The fruit should just fall off. You shouldn't have to yank it off. A couple different things to look for. So seed pods. So here I have some lupin up here. They come in pods. They're usually dry. They might be cracking open, especially if you see something that comes in a pod. I'm thinking like Vancouveria, so inside out flower. I'm thinking Dicentra famosa, bleeding heart. Those kind of come in a pod that bursts open. Violets as well. You want that pod to be dry or like opening. That's how you know it's ready. Violet glabella, that's a hard one that people collect too early. You have to wait until it's open or else those seeds are not going to be ready. And I know that those seeds aren't ready because if you open it artificially, the seeds are yellow and ripe seeds are almost always dark in color, often black. So an onion seed, a bleeding heart seed, a violet seed, they're all dark in color and that's how you know that seed is ready. And then as I was talking about with berries, they are not going to resist when they pull off. Like a ripe salal berry is just going to like fall right off of the branch or anything like that. A rule that I don't have written here, but I think you should keep in mind that I borrow from the Bureau of Land Management is the 20% rule. So harvest no more than 20% of available fruits from 20% of a population. So if you have 100 salal bushes, harvest from 20 of those bushes and harvest no more than 20% of the fruit from each bush. This is to preserve food for other wildlife. And this is also to preserve genetic diversity. If I were to just like completely strip a plant, an individual from its fruits, then it would not pass on its genes. And as we know, genetic diversity is really important, especially for restoration. So harvest a little bit from a lot of different plants. And then you don't have to collect on your own, but purchasing seed can often be unreliable. I opt to harvest, I probably harvest about 70% of my own seed because I just can't find what I want in other, like from suppliers. Again, like the Washington native plant nursery industry is underdeveloped. We don't have seed suppliers unless you want to buy like huge bulk. So finding a population and learning how to successfully harvest it is a great way to have your own reliable source of fresh seed. All right, so here's a seed harvesting calendar. I wanted to put some things on here for y'all, species that you might be interested that are coming up. Seed harvesting happens all through the summer. So I start harvesting seeds generally in early June or early May, and I'll continue harvesting seeds sometimes through October, but it starts to slow down at the end of August. So here's just some select species that I've pulled for you. Um, I just finished collecting Dicentra formosa. They're still going. So that's Bleeding Heart. The cottonwoods just went really crazy. Got a bunch of seeds from them. Next on my list, I'm looking at salmonberry, so Rubus spectabilis. Also, thimbleberry is going to be ready soon. And then all of our saxifrags, so the Tolima grandiflora, the Tomelia, so that's fringe cup and piggyback plant. Those seeds are going to be ready soon as well. And then strawberries, that's what I have all here. Um, yeah, another note, especially with strawberries, I have a really hard time getting strawberries from Fragaria chiloensis. That's the beach strawberry because the birds always beat me. So what I also often end up doing is once a fruit begins to develop, I'll put like a mesh bag around it. And that can be a way to kind of outcompete the birds, or at least like slow them down a little bit so that fruit can mature and you can harvest it. I found that harvesting prematurely and then letting things ripen like on in your windowsill or something like that is not necessarily effective. Your germination rates are going to be lower than if you just let it ripen on the plant. Okay. Seed cleaning techniques. Seed cleaning is fun. It's a puzzle. Um, Dry seeds are generally like the easiest to clean. They're not as fun, but they're a little bit more straightforward. They can really be cleaned with like common-ish kitchen supplies. So I have like a strainer. I have this kind of like um cauldron with a it's almost like a metal I don't know, this thing that I use, some sieves. Yeah, we're doing a lot of winnowing, we're doing some sieving, we're threshing sometimes. It's really like just with propagation, seed cleaning is the same way of like trial and error. Just try different things out and see how it goes for you. Unless you're cleaning like pounds and pounds and pounds of seed, it's really is just like doing it by hand and having fun with it and experimenting. But not all seed needs to be cleaned before sowing. We'll talk about some examples of like fluff that don't bother with it. Just sow it as is. So like fluff, just put it in a bag and broadcast it later. If you're gonna store seeds, you want them to completely dry, and then store them in a cool place, like a dark, cool place is ideal. Silica packs are helpful for long-term storage, so you can just like buy them online. They're pretty cheap. If you're going to store something for multiple years or a year and you have a humid place, my apartment's pretty humid, just in the cabinet in a bag, like plastic bag is fine, paper bag is fine, and a little silica pack goes a long way. But I will warn that some seeds are only viable for one season. Some seeds are only viable for like hours after picking. Um, and then other seeds can enter secondary dormancy if stored. So if you have the option, like harvest seed and then sow it. That is like your best way to get something to germinate. Anything that's like comes in fluff generally has a low storage time. So cottonwood is the best example. When they drop their seeds, those seeds germinate like the next day. And they're only viable for some people say only 4 hours after the cotton falls, but I've seen them germinate like a couple weeks afterwards. They have a very short window of viability. Generally, like other fluff, like fireweed, has a really short viability period. Um, on the other hand, you have things like maples. They'll enter a secondary dormancy. So vine maple or what's the other one? Big leaf maple. You can harvest them and they'll store just fine. They won't mold or anything, but they enter a secondary dormancy where you'll have to like do some weird pre-treatment to try and get them to wake up again. Whereas if you had just sown them, then they would have been fine. Sown them the same year. Okay, I want to give an example of cleaning berries because this is one that I've struggled with, but I think I have finally found a good technique. So this is Rubus ursinus. This is trailing blackberry. These berries, they ripen between like August to September. I'll collect berries and you can see this is a food processor that the blades have been dipped in Plastidip. So just to dull them so you're not completely crushing the seed. And this is not very many berries. This is like maybe a handful of two of berries, but there's a lot of seeds in there. So I'll collect my berries. The sooner you can get to them, the better. So same day is ideal. Soak them in water for like an hour to get them to like hydrate and be very malleable. And then we're going to separate the seed from the fruit in this dulled blender with water. So just blend it up. I think I have a picture. Yeah, there we go. You'll end up with this like slurry like this. But there's all this pulp on top, and this is the seed that you want down here. So then you have to strain off the pulp. So usually I'll like float the pulp in the water and then like skim it, or you could try and use like a strainer with different sizes. Um, but usually like the float and skim method is my preferred. And then you'll eventually end up with clean seed like this. And then you can sow them immediately, or you can try and store them for a little bit. If you sow them immediately or if you store them, I recommend soaking them in a little bit of hydrogen peroxide just to prevent the seed from molding. Anything that comes from a berry molds very quickly. So if it comes from fruit, I would give it just a quick dilute H2O2, like 3% hydrogen peroxide, so very dilute for like 15 minutes. Just helps to prevent the molding. And like young seedlings are susceptible to that mold as well, so it'll help things not die off when they germinate. And then sow immediately, or you can dry them and store them. So set them out to dry, and then put them away in a little bag with a silica packet, something like that. And then it's so you've collected your seed, you have cleaned your seed, and now you're pre-treating your seed so you can sow it. So the Pacific Northwest, we have seasons. Yippee. But that means that our seeds often have some sort of dormancy. I can do a whole class on dormancy, but I'm going to give you a speed run right here of some of the important terms that you need to know in the dormancy that they're related to. So our first thing, and these are in order of how, like, what you would prescribe to the plant if necessary. So the first thing you might do is scarification. So scarification is the physical abrasion to the seed coat. So think of the natural history of the plant, like how is a berry distributed? It's usually eaten by something, digested, and deposited somewhere else. So scarification is mimicking that digestive system and breaking down the seed coat that's preventing the germinating seed from like busting out, right? So it's mimicking natural dispersion, aka digestion. And you can do this, the two common ways are with sandpaper. So here I have a little, this is like a bread pan with sandpaper on the bottom and like a sandpaper buff. You have to balance like buffing them without crushing them. Like you don't want to pulverize it, but you do want to break the seed coat. Or you can use a gentle acid. So a dilute acid sometimes is necessary, but the seed coat sandpaper is my favorite method. Some things also have like a waxy coat. So I'm thinking like Mirkegal or some lupins, they have a waxy coat. So steeping them in hot water can melt that wax off. That's also a form of like scarification. So we're going to scarify it and then we're going to imbibe it. So imbibe, that word, that's just the fancy horticulture word for to drink. So the seed needs to drink. It needs to rehydrate to signal that it is in the ideal germinating conditions. And so here's my setup here when I'm doing a bunch of different species. It's just water. I have a little like net, like mesh metal thing on top that holds them down just so they don't float up. And then I do use like a fish bubbler because you don't want the seed to drown. So you have a little bit of air moving in there. And I'll imbibe them usually overnight. 24 hours is sufficient generally. If you have like something with a really significant seed coat, so like a nut, like an acorn or a hazelnut, maple, sometimes it might be necessary to imbibe them for like 2 to 4 days. Um, Imbibing, it's also like it's successful if your seed expands inside. So like think of in size. So think of like like chia. When you soak chia, imbibes and the chia seeds expand. That's the same thing you want your seed to do generally. So your scarification has been successful and you've broken the seed coat if you imbibe your seed and it expands. So that's one way to check. Not all seeds need to be scarified because not all seeds are dispersed through digestion, but all seeds generally need to be imbibed to break that dormancy. And then the last thing I would do, or I guess the next thing I would do, would be stratification. So, stratification is a big, scary word. It's not that deep. It used to refer to like you would put the seeds in a stratified layer of media. We don't do it like that anymore. It doesn't need to be that complex. It's literally just wet peat, wet peat moss. But stratification, the you're breaking the physiological dormancy by mimicking seasonal temperature changes. So, in layman terms, think of when most things are going to seed. Some things are going to seed now, but like generally when we think of like harvest season, that's the fall. But the best time to germinate isn't necessarily like October, November because it's going to get cold and the sun is going to go away. So maybe I don't want to germinate in November. Maybe I want to germinate in like March. So a lot of seeds have evolved physiological dormancy that has hormones. They have hormones on the inside that help them know what temperature it is. So you want to like mimic winter. They want to go through winter and then they're like, oh, it's spring. It's time to germinate. So cold stratification is going to mimic that winter cycle. You can also do warm stratification, which would mimic a summer cycle. So I'm going to keep picking on Snowberry. Snowberry wants to go through a multiple because when do snowberries have fruit? Like all the time. So they want to go through multiple rounds of stratification, multiple seasons before they decide, like, yep, okay, this is the right time to germinate. Um, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. This is just the seeds are in a mesh bag. Here's some wet peat, and then it goes in my fridge for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the protocol for the seed is. Okay, yeah, Snowberry. I've been picking on this guy, so let's do a deep dive into Symphoricarpus albus, snowberry. It's a common and resilient choice for urban landscaping and restoration. After the heat dome, it was identified that like snowberry is like the way to go. It does really well. It's very resilient, but it's super hard to grow from seed. So the pre-treatment for this, I'll collect the berries, I'll clean the berries, I'll scarify them with sandpaper, and then they need all of those seasons. So it gets 45 days of warm stratification. So in wet peat moss in a warm place, I usually just set them up like in a room with a space heater, or in the summer, it's just hot enough. 60 days of cold stratification. So then that bucket of peat goes into the fridge. Another 45 days of warm strat, so back into the hot office. And then they get a gibberellic acid soak. So that's one of the hormones. We like shock them with a little bit of hormones. And then it gets another 120 days of warm stratification before they're willing to germinate. So this guy's, what is that like? That's like a year of pre-treatment before it's willing to germinate. And then the germination rates are often pretty low, less than 50%. But like I said, 5, 10, 15% germination rate on snowberry, that's a good day actually for me. That's a great year of snowberry. Or alternatively, you can take a cutting of this and propagate it quickly and successfully. So, pick your poison. What is your goal to have ultimate genetic diversity? And so you really want to grow this from seed, or is your goal to get snowberry on your site as quickly as possible? Seed isn't always the best choice. All right, let's talk a little bit about site prep and direct sowing. So full transparency, I work in a container nursery. So I sow things into cones generally. So I did talk to some of my people, some of my colleagues at Oxbow that do work in the fields, and we collaborated and came up with some ideas of how to be most successful with native plant in direct sowing situations. So site prep can be really critical for successful establishment of native seeds. This is like what I'm growing them in. So like a cone with peat moss. Here I have red columbine, Aquilegia formosa, another not well behaved plant to grow from seed. But the germinant is really small. It's very fragile. So if it was competing with anything else in this cone, it would not be having a good time. So preparation to prevent weed pressure is your biggest thing. You don't want it to compete with other weeds. And then another reason you don't want other weeds is because young seedlings need good airflow or else they're going to get moldy. The mold is called botrytis. And botrytis will kill them. So you don't want weeds, one, because you don't want them to compete, and two, you don't want them to smother them or make them mold. So I don't know if I have another picture here. I do. What I came up with some of my colleagues at Oxbow is that first you're going to want to terminate the existing weeds in the bed, either via solarization or hand weeding. So here's an example here of just some cardboard being used to smother the weeds before direct sowing. So this is like pseudo solarizing where you're just smothering them. They don't get any light, so they all die. And then you want to pull out any of that material. And then you want to kind of like encourage the any other seeds, weed seeds that are in the soil to germinate. So you allow the bed to sit for like 2 to 4 weeks to allow any of the other weeds that are in there to germinate and start growing so you can harvest them again. So get rid of any of the other seeds, but do not till. So you don't want to like turn the soil over again because then you're going to turn up more weed seeds, bring them to the top again, and then they're going to germinate again. So once you've terminated all your weeds and nothing else is growing in there, like do not till your soil. A light fluff might be good, but you don't want to turn the soil over because then you're pulling up more weed seed. So hopefully this is what we use. That's what they use on our kids farm at Oxbow to prep the site. So hopefully this would work for native plant installation as well. And then as far as technique for sowing, there's a handful of different techniques. Hand or drill sowing, this might be necessary. So that's like your traditional, like I dig a little hole and I put the seed in. That may be necessary for larger seeds, but many smaller seeds like forbs, flowers, or graminoids, so your grasses, rushes, and sedges, can just be surface sown. The only thing you really got to worry about is things eating them. So broadcasting is fine. Broadcasting is just the fancy word for chucking the seeds, just a handful and then throwing them, either by hand or with like people have those like push grass, like lawn seed spreaders. If you're doing bulk, you could do that. I would prep the site by gently fluffing it, sowing it. So scatter the seeds around and then just water it in to help push them down if they need to and let signal to them that it's a good place to germinate. Some tips I got from some of our farmers at Oxbow is to combat pest pressure, so mostly birds. You can consider covering the seeds with remay, so that's just like a thin white fabric that you can cover with them until they establish, or increase your seeding rate by like 20 to 50% if you're broadcasting, because the birds, they're gonna come eat some of them. So hopefully, if you just put enough seed out there, they won't eat it all. And as an example here, I have Campanula rotundiflora. This is bluebell bellflower, really beautiful native plant. It can be bulked. Here's how little the seed is, like very tiny. So it can be bulked up with some green sand and then just broadcast spread around. Or you can like take a little pinch and kind of put it in the soil like that. But whatever is your style, if it's more chaotic broadcasting or if you really want to take the time, Campanula rotundiflora germinates really well. It's a hardy plant. So as long as it doesn't get eaten by things, I think it'll survive. There's a saying, that you should sow a seed as deep as the seed is wide. So look how small this seed is. Like how wide is that seed? Not wide at all. So this like seed, it should be surface sown. So if you're ever in doubt, do you have a big seed? Like do you have an acorn then it should be sown, you know, like an inch deep or so. Do you have a tiny piece of dust like a rush or a campanula? Like those just go on the surface. So don't think too deep about how deep to sow it. Big seed, deeper, smaller seed, surface sow. Okay. All right. I've got like, what, 20 minutes here? A couple species I want to highlight that we can pick up some tips and tricks from, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So nodding onion, I wanted to talk about Allium cernuum because it self-seeds really well. So if you don't want to do the sowing, you could just buy one of these and then let it self-seed on its own. But if you do want to self-seed, here's a prescription for how to do that. So the collection period is usually about August, September. This is what the seed head should look like. So the flowers are like nodding like this, and then each of those flowers will dry out and start to open. So those black things, those are each an individual seed. The flower turns brown, it dries out, the capsules begin to open, and the seed is black in color. So it looks like this. Cleaning, they're not too difficult. This I would recommend like kind of just shaking it between your hands. So you can take the stem and just like go like this, or the chaff off here, it's very papery, so it just comes off with a little bit of abrasion as well. Putting them like clipping the heads off, putting it in a paper bag, and then just shaking the bag is pretty effective as well. And then you can winnow, so just like blow off the little paper bits that are left behind, and then there you go, there's your seed. As far as pre-treatment goes, people have different opinions about this one. It self-seeds pretty well, so honestly, you probably don't have to do anything, but I've gotten the best germination rates by gently scarifying them with sandpaper, so just a really gentle buff. They're not super fragile, but they're a little fragile, so if you go too heavy, you'll bust open and you'll see the white at the inside of the seed, and you don't quite want to scarify them that hard. And then imbibing them overnight, so soaking them in the bubbler overnight, and then you can sow them. These ones, they're a little bit bigger seed, so 1 to 2 centimeters deep, and then a gentle cover would be good. Some species, not this one, but some species do need sun to germinate. Anything in the Ericaceae family, so huckleberries, solal, rhododendron, madrone, those all need light to germinate. Some seeds need light to germinate, so you don't want to cover them. But Allium cernuum, cover it up. It likes that. Okay. Oh, yeah. Here's how big the seeds are. They're, you know, big-ish. Here's centimeter, you know, or this is an inch, but they're not too big, but easy enough to work with. Okay, yarrow. Yarrow's a great restoration plant. Lovely, great for pollinators, resistant to mowing. I always encourage people to get rid of their lawns and put in yarrow instead. Good medicinal plant as well. Collection, these are ready when the flower turns brown. So again, things are going to turn brown, and then the seed is visible. So here's an example of the like seed head. I'm not sure if you can quite see here, but there's kind of these lighter tan bits. That's the seed like developing and kind of coming out a little bit of the seed head. This is usually happening August to October. Yarrow, they aren't like in sync with each other. They'll kind of be ready at different times. This is similar to the nodding onion. So the hand flower head, I don't know. Put the flower head in a paper bag. So turn it upside down in a paper bag, and then allow it to dry, is what that's supposed to say, dry. And then a lot of them will come off that way. Or you can, if you're being a little impatient or they're not coming off, you can just like rub your hand across the top of the flower head, and that'll hopefully encourage, like your hand will catch on some of these little seeds and will encourage them to fall off. As far as pre-treatment goes, none. You don't need to, you can just direct broadcast these, don't need to imbibe them or anything. If you do want to sow them in a container, then I would imbibe them. But if you're just direct sowing into the field, just throw them out there and let them do their thing. broadcasting is the preferred method. This is what we do at Oxbow. We do grow some yarrow as like pollinator habitat, and it's just broadcasting, a little bit of water in, works great. Or you can sow them very shallow. I believe I have an image of the seed here. Yeah, so these are millimeters, so it's not a huge seed, big enough to see, much bigger than the bluebell bellflower, but still kind of small. Okay, big leaf lupin. So this is a seed that's going to come in a bean pod. So pods are fun. The bean pods, any pod, you want to wait for it to dry out. So this is a green bean. This bean is not ready. You can see that it's starting to kind of turn brown on top, but if it's a green bean, it's not ready. You want it to, I guess I don't have an image here, but you want it to really like turn gray, brown. The seed might rattle on the inside. That's how you know that it's ready, it's dry, it can be dispersed. And that's usually happening, like they'll flower and they'll seed at different times throughout, from like July to September. One thing I want to say about lupins is they do hybridize. So if you grow lupin seeds and you're like, wow, my lupin seed is like, or my lupin flower is yellow, or it's pink, or it's white, it has hybridized with something, with some non-native variety. So be careful. Same with yarrow as well. It can hybridize. There's recommendations for like how far apart you should grow native versus non-native if you don't want them to cross pollinate. So do a little bit of research. There's a lot of species out there. I can think of yarrow, lupins, bleeding hearts, columbine. They will hybridize with ornamental varieties. So be careful. Um, as far as cleaning goes, this is a pretty big seed. So just allow the pod to continue to dry out. Again, it should rattle, and then they might start opening up on their own, or you can just hand open the pod, just like squeeze it, and then it'll open. And then gather the seeds. I think they're very pretty. They come in many different colors and textures. They kind of look like little rocks. Beautiful. Pre-treatment, these ones I do recommend a pre-treatment for. I would scarify it with sandpaper, so a little bit of a buff, or hot water. There are some lupins, my lupins where I'm from in Michigan, are like a desert, like a savanna type. So they are like need hot to germinate. So hot water is one way, an alternative way you could try to break down the seed coat. And then imbibe them for a day. These ones I definitely recommend. Like, you see how this seed kind of has this like dimple in it. This one's like a little shriveled up. So look at your seed before you imbibe it, like before you scarify it, and then after you imbibe it. And you'll know if your scarification was effective if it is no longer wrinkly, like if it is plump and not shrivelly anymore. If it is still shrivelly, then just scarify it again and imbibe it again, until you have like mastered your scarification intensity. Sowing, these are not huge, but pretty big seeds. So I would recommend sowing these 1 to 2 centimeters deep and covering. Germination rates on lupin are pretty good in general. They actually don't like being in containers. So I would direct sow these. But put like, three, 5 seeds in your hole, just to guarantee that something germinates. All right. And then I think this might be my last one. Western Canada goldenrod, Solidago lepidata, or lepida. This species, Solidago in general, is incredibly valuable, biodiversity wise. They support so many different species. They're blooming a little bit later in the season as well, so they're sometimes the only or one of the only like pollinator food sources at the time of year when they're like blooming in like October. Also really aggressive, so if you can establish it by seed, then it's going to just take over and go resourcelessly grow on its own. So the collection for this happens after it's done flowering, which is like October, November-ish. This is what the fluff will look like. So the flower will, it's kind of like a dandelion, it's going to stop being a flower and start being white fluff. and then it should easily separate from the stem. So you should just be able to grab little tufts and it'll come off real easy. If you have to like yank it, then it's not ready. As far as cleaning goes, don't like just don't worry about it. Trying to separate asters from their fluff, just like it doesn't make sense. Solid egg, so goldenrod, Douglas aster, like things like that. Uh, Fireweed, like I would not separate them from the fluff. Just like literally take a tuft of fluff and stick it in the hole. If you want to sew them like that. Um, if you're going to broadcast, which I think is a viable technique because the seed itself on here, I don't think I have an image of the seed, but the seed itself is very small that's attached to the fluff. So they want to be surface-ish sewn. I would broadcast them and then water it, like sprinkle water it in to prevent the fluff from floating away. Um, yeah, it's a lot of things with fluff, like don't worry about cleaning them. They don't need a pre-treatment. Don't imbibe fluff. Like don't try to imbibe fluff because then you'll just end up with this like wet mass that is like incredibly difficult to work with. So just direct sow it, let it imbibe in the soil. And know that a lot of things that come in fluff are not viable for multiple years. So collecting fresh, anything that is fluffy is going to be your best bet. Okay. I think yeah, that's my slides. I made good time. I think I'll pass it back to Jacob or Eric to tee up some questions, maybe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leah. All right, so for questions, there's been some in the chat, and I so we can have folks if either way, we can just do it from the chat, or if people are interested, they also you can sorry, I'm situating myself here. You can also raise your hand. So there's been some great questions. How I would like to start. Is anybody interested in raising their hand to ask a question of Leah? And if not feeling comfortable that way, we can just go through the chat as well. No
Yeah,
pressure.
I see some
Yeah,
chat questions I'm willing to
do it.
address. So the first one I see here is from Rachel. Do you have issues here with Phytophthora in nursery stock? And I'm really glad that you brought this question up because I will talk endlessly about Phytophthora. So Phytophthora is an invasive pathogen, fungal pathogen. It spreads through water. It's a water mold and it is like responsible for sudden oak death. And so, yes, we have Phytophthora in Washington. It's not as severe as it is like more south, like in California, but it is here. And nursery stock is one of, if not the like most intense spreader of Phytophthora. So yes, we have this issue. Yes, I would check with your nursery about what they do to prevent Phytophthora. There's a lot of sanitation and prevention things that you can do. So yeah, check with your nursery and see what they're doing. Yeah, copy of seed calendar. If anyone's interested about either specific techniques, when to harvest, pre-treatment techniques, like just reach out to me at leah@oxbow.org. I'm like more than willing. Oxbow holds a lot of knowledge that I don't have an effective way to get out. So just email me. Jake is asking what size grit sandpaper do you use? All different sizes. I start with kind of a finer size, but I've found that it doesn't matter too much. So whatever you have will work. There are people that do research about like which size grit is more effective, but like a 5% germination rate versus like a 6% germination rate doesn't matter that much to me. Um, Jonathan is asking, when you say hot water, how hot? Like for, oh, hi, Jonathan.
Oh yeah,
Like
sorry. Yeah, I was just you said hot water, and so I'm wondering, how hot that is. I'm sure it's not boiling, but
yeah,
I didn't know what range you're talking about.
the generally what I do, and I haven't killed the seeds or cooked the seeds as far as I know, but again, a lot of this like kind of happens in like a kitchen-ish setting.
Hmm.
As I put the kettle on, I let it boil, and then I wait a second. I'm like, okay, it's boiled. Now I'll go get my seeds. And so it's like it's hot water.
Oh, okay.
And you can see if you successfully melted the coat off, like you can see a film on top of the water.
Hmm.
I'm still experimenting with this version of pre-treatment. So I don't know if I have like a great I haven't dialed in the technique perfectly yet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Someone is asking about lupin. It says, if you harvest seed at the plant and want to sow it in the immediate area of the plant, do you have to pre-treat the seed or can you put it in the ground immediately? Success rate of germination. Honestly, like just think in the natural history of the plant, like it's nothing's gonna eat it. Probably nothing eats lupin, I don't think, maybe. So it's just falling right there on the ground and doing its thing. We can try and help it along. So pre-treatment is gonna increase your germination rate generally, but like also things just self-seed on their own and I don't do anything. Like they just do it in the wild. So I think it's worth trying. Like if you're really want or need lupin or whatever species to like take over this area, like you're trying to outcompete something, do some pre-treatment. Otherwise, like ecological horticulture, just doing growing, letting nature grow the plants. So, um, Lindsay is saying, if we buy seeds from native seed companies, should we apply these seed prep methods to the corresponding species? Should we apply these seed prep methods? Yes, I would. Um, Generally seeds don't come pre-treated. Sometimes they come with instructions, but not very often. The only weird thing is like cones. Like anything that comes in a cone is really difficult to harvest. So I that's the one thing like I don't harvest myself because they have to like be dispersed and they have morphological dormancy and da 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 da. So like things that come out of cones, so like pine trees and spruce and those sorts of things, generally like let someone else handle the pre-treatment and then they'll sell you seed in bulk. Um, Only tip I have for Oregon iris is just like make sure the seed imbibes. And when you're growing it, don't get it too wet because you'll kill it if it's too wet. um, Ooh, Craig is asking about fern propagation. I would look up the Hardy Fern Society. They have I forget what issue it is, but they have they have like a um zine, like a booklet about fern propagation that is kind of like the authority for fern propagation in the PNW. So that's the Hardy Fern Society. Um, Ferns are they're hit or miss. Like some people, I know some people that grow sword fern like literally on a brick and it grows just fine for them. Um, thanks, Eric. Otherwise I can't get them to grow in the nursery, in a nursery setting, and they're also really slow. So a fern like the spores germinate on peat and then they turn into this like pseudo fern like mat for a while and they take like 4 years before it becomes like a fern that you would recognize as a fern. So definitely give it a try. Like sounds like a fun hobby, but not something like growing from spore, not something I would like rely on for your restoration site. However, a lot of ferns kind of just do their own thing, which is great. Like they'll just, if you have one, it'll spread, which is great. And you can divide them as well. So I would recommend that over like trying to harvest a fern frond. and then like germinate the spores. That's a fun challenge, I'll say. See. Bleeding heart. I don't scarify bleeding heart. I just imbibe it and then germinate and then sow it. So we just imbibed, I think on like Monday and sowed on Tuesday. So they're like popping right now. The only thing with bleeding heart is there are look-alike ornamental cultivars. So just take a second glance and make sure you actually have the native species. Um, yeah, but yeah, I think imbibing helps. Bleeding heart can be a tricky one. The fresher the seed, the better. And fun thing about bleeding hearts, you'll notice the seed. So there's like the black seed, and then there's this little bit of like white stuff on the side. That's like a fat storage. They're distributed through ants. So the ants, they like take the whole seed back to their nest. They eat that little fat stuff, and then they're like, wait, the rest of the seed isn't edible, and they kick it out of their nest, and that's how they're dispersed. So a lot of people get freaked out by that little like piece of fat on the end. Like if it comes off while it's imbibing or like you crush it, don't worry about it because an ant was going to eat it anyway. So no worries. Let's see. If an area has been taken over by buttercup or some other invasive, um, which can deplete phosphorus or change soil pH, is some sort of soil amendment recommended? There's probably someone out there who could answer that question better than I can. Um, I so probably yes. Um, I would just rely on like what ones you do know are available. So like I know that like lupins and other Fabaceae type things are gonna add nitrogen into the soil. And I know that ericoids like acidic soil. So if it's becomes very acidic, you could consider like huckleberries. Eric, it looks like maybe you want to tag into this.
Oh no, I'm just gonna say we're happy to follow up to separately from if people have individual questions about projects or sites. So please reach out to me as well.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Like there's someone here that knows that answer. It's maybe not me. Um,
Leah, I had
yeah,
one question I wanted to kind of, or just sort of a topic to talk about. There was a
sure.
lot of conversation about just like um, cutting propagation and also being mindful of genetic diversity. Could you talk about kind of the balance of that, or how you might navigate your thoughts on genetic diversity in propagation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I work at Oxbow, and that's because I love growing from seed, and I'm like totally obsessed with seed propagation, genetic diversity. I love being able to select the ecotype of my seed. So if like for example, Oxbow is in the Snoqualmie Valley. So we collect seeds from the Snoqualmie Valley, which are like micro adapted to that area. And so they're very well suited for Snoqualmie Valley. We also work with the Snoqualmie tribe and grow species for like other sites. So they harvest seeds from that area and like they're micro adapted to that area, so on and so forth. So like seed propagation gives you a lot of genetic diversity and it allows you to like micro select your adaptations. However, like there are advantages to cuttings. It's faster, it's easier. Like um snowberry, I'll always pick on snowberry. um nine bark, any Lonicera, so any like honeysuckle, what else? Thimbleberry sometime, any dogwood, like those take really well from cutting. And sometimes, like in the example of I really need to shade out this reed canary grass immediately, I'm gonna take a cutting. The only thing is like I always tell this story about bananas. Like the modern banana is a clone. They are all genetically identical. So if a fungal pathogen goes through the banana plant that genome is susceptible to, just like boom, no more banana. And you don't want your restoration site to be like that. Like if you have cuttings of the same tree, then you're not setting yourself up for success. You have a very like weak, I guess like ecological immune system. Um, and yeah, you'll lose all your trees. So if you are going to rely on cutting, like take cuttings from different trees to just help buffer that whenever possible. Um, yeah.
Amazing. We have a few minutes left, and before we kind of get to some of our closing, I'm gonna look for more questions. I know there was a member, Aloysius, wanted to share one propagation technique if they're on. They had mentioned when we came out of a small group. Are you there? Did you want to share that, Aloysius?
Yeah, propagation technique. What
Hmm.
I'm about to share is going to kind of span a little bit of the distance of like everything we sort of talked about, but through the lens of Grandmother Moon. A lot of people think about the sun when we're growing, and I hear a lot of people talking about we try it, see if it worked, and if it didn't, we tried something else. I hear that from a lot of folks. And something I wanted to point out is this attunement to the natural rhythms beyond seasons, the seasons of the moon. There's about 7 days between each phase. It's like 7 days, 9 hours between each moon phase of the lunar cycle. Mother Earth organizes herself through that calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. And each phase has things that it does to support growth, movement, flow, gravitational pull, things like that. So I wanted to kind of, through this lens of like, okay, live staking. When do you go out and take it? When do you put it in the ground? Something else I heard is like, we don't water it when we put it in. We water everything. We make an offering of water to everything when we put it in the ground. And if we're talking about the moon phases and when to do things, our new moon is new beginnings. And so the gravitational pull encourages seed germination. The best time to put seeds in the ground is in the new moon. In the first quarter, that's kind of when we uproot plants that are in the area that we don't necessarily want there, like buttercup, right? We're taking out something that will suck away nutrients from what we want to grow. Um, the full moon is when we harvest, and the full moon in the third quarter, those are both times when we prune. So we prune in between sort of the full moon and the third quarter of the moon, and then there's like 7 days between the third quarter of the moon and the new moon again, which is when we plant. So for circling back to best practices through an indigenous lens or perspective, is that if we prune in the full moon to the third quarter, around the third quarter, when we see the third quarter moon in the sky, we got about 7 days of nursing it in water, a live stake, and then staking it in the ground in the new moon. So I just kind of wanted to like plant these seeds of like how to think about, instead of just like trying something and it not working, um, try maybe working with the moon cycles. Um, and the other part that like I didn't really hear in a lot of I didn't hear it in any shares here, and I don't hear it in a lot of spaces. Is I heard it a little bit here. Just kidding. I heard it in my breakout room. Is the environment, the soil already? Like getting soil tests and knowing like what the initial condition is of your soil, so you know what nutrients it does and doesn't have, which can help you do companion planting, different plants that will do certain things to the soil, and it allows you to plan whether or not you need to like remediate the soil so you make the best growing space before you start planting. So it's like it's all long game because it's to plant well. It's generational. It's not like in a season we do the thing and it grows. It's like looking out into the past and looking in the past where it's been into the future where it's going, and having a lot of spaciousness between that. No urgency in the planting and doing the things it takes to give it like the most uh, possibilities for growth. I guess those were just something that was like burning inside me as I was listening to a
Hmm.
lot of the shares. Is an attunement to the moon and how much it can help you because it controls the water and the tides and the movement of everything and life and growth.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. It reminds me actually of a biology class where they talk about like some plants are triggered by not how much exposure they have to sunlight, but actually how much time they have without sunlight that triggers their flowering method. Things like that. That's awesome. Thank you, Aloysius. There's one more question from Joseph. I don't know if you got it, Leah. Any tips or thoughts, experience on direct sowing into wetland sites?
Um, I mean, wet ground is sticky, so that will help you out. If you're like dealing with fluff or something like that.
Hmm.
Juncus seeds, rush seeds, very small, very broadcastable. Um, yeah, I don't have a ton of experience there, mostly because I like Juncus seeds are just so like small and hard to work with. So
Hmm.
I would let them do their thing.
Hmm. Cool. Well, we're looking at about 1 minute left. I think we can look at closing. Aloysius, there's some questions people are asking you in the chat. Yeah, we're gonna follow up with resources. We'll share the recording. We will share like a PDF with all the slides. Thank you so much to Leah for all your information you're sharing. Really awesome. And yeah, I would just encourage you to take everything you've heard, everything you've learned in this year and going forward. Like just try things, play. Let us know what's working, what's not working. We are a partnership, and with collaborative learning and collaborative efforts, we really learn. Just like Leah mentioned, it's vertically held knowledge sometimes with native plant restoration or native plant propagation. And I think yeah, us having multiple brains, multiple people, collaborative experience will help us with our community education. So yeah, with that, you can contact Eric or I, and Leah here at the bottom. Eric, I don't know if there's anything you want to share as we kind of come to a close.
I just really want to thank you, Jacob,
Yep.
and Leah,
Likewise.
and all of you here, every single one of you for being here. I mean, this is awesome. There's a lot of us on this virtual meeting today and just sharing. And this is a first session of a three-part series, and we're putting it together. So I hope you all can join us for the second session. There'll be more information about that coming out soon, but it's a little later in the summer. Looking at the calendar and me learning a lot tonight, I'm like, oh, maybe this session's not the right time. But we're just trying to find a site and we're gonna figure something out. So I think that's all I have really is just thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, May. May really is behind the scenes organizing, keeping us going. So thank you, May. And I think that's yeah, I think we should wrap it up.
All right, all right. Without further ado, thanks everybody. Take good care. Have fun out there. Enjoy the beginning of the warm season, and we'll see y'all soon. Thanks again, Leah. Thank you, May. Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everybody.